So you do get your search warrant. It wasn't easy, but just long story short on that, so much of that painstaking FBI work went into it, and it wasn't a guarantee that you were going to get it, but all those years and hours of collective effort paid off. You got the warrant. You go to execute the search warrant. Jerry, who you mentioned, the local, who Ted knew, and he was important, he was the front man, and then there are two other guys who went to knock on the door with a ruse about, we need to check your property line, and it was something, Ted Kaczynski had to see Jerry's face, otherwise he wouldn't have opened that door, he would have been suspicious, so he was critical, and lo and behold, he was home, Ted Kaczynski, and you got him. You grabbed him. He said he was going to go back in. He would show you the property lines. He's just going to go back in and grab his coat. And no, he was not going to grab the coat. The FBI grabbed him, pulled out a 6 hour. That was the end of his attempt to go back in the house. And he was not placed under arrest, but taken to another cabin where questioning began. And I have to ask you, after all this effort, right? He's in this cabin. You've got him, you and your team. And like, what are you thinking at this point? Because the pictures do show this disheveled, crazy looking mountain man who looks just like he hasn't seen a brush or a shower in 20 years. Like, what are you thinking?
Well, Max couldn't wait to take a bath. I mean, he already felt really dirty. He wanted to get away from here and take a shower as soon as he could. But he would end up being with Kaczynski just about the rest of the day and into the night at about 1 o'clock. I was thinking more of what we had to do next. I mean, it was almost like, okay, that part of this is over, and now we can breathe a little easier, but not really, because we've got a lot of work to do. So now we start bringing in everybody else, all these evidence response teams, and then we call the Bureau. But now the Bureau is saying, well, you don't have anything but a search warrant. What are you doing? Well, we're taking him out and putting him into another cabin to be on ice here for a while we decide what to do. And of course, our plan was to take him up the mountain and over to Helena. And of course, DOJ said, you can't do that. You can't arrest this man. Well, we're not going to let him go back in the cabin. And so by late that night, after hours of debating that occurred back east, we'd already taken Theodore Kaczynski into Helena. He was in the car with Max and Tom and Paul Wilhelmus, a postal inspector. They took him into Helena to get him booked at the jail eventually. And Jim and I were following them up the mountain and into Helena. And we were eventually on the phone with the director. And he's getting kind of a lot of information that I'll call it what it was. It was fiction from DOJ people that had they had no clue of what they were talking about. And so people were a little concerned. Are you making an arrest that you can't make? But by about midnight, Howard Shapiro, the FBI chief legal counsel, got on the phone with me. I said, just let me go through everything that's going on in the other room. And lo and behold, he said, I don't need to hear anything else. I'll brief the director, do what you're doing, and get this person locked up, and we'll deal with the rest of this tomorrow. And that's exactly what happened.
You eventually, after sort of de-rigging the house and making sure it was safe to enter, and there were all sorts of things, you gotta read Terry's book to hear like the painstaking efforts to make sure that it was safe. But you get into his cabin, and this to me is where it all comes together. 20 years of clue gathering would match up with what you found in that cabin. Forget enough to make an arrest. Now we're talking, we need enough to put this man away for the rest of his life. And it was all there. I think about, let me just give you one. I think about Terry, the eyewitness. Is that Tammy, the eyewitness who had given us the aviator sunglasses and all that back at the one bombing years ago. Now, nobody ever made an eyewitness. Nobody ever matched that picture up with Ted Kaczynski and said, I know that guy. So, okay, did she really make a difference? 100%. Because tell us about some of the things she described that you found in Ted Kaczynski's cabin.
Well, of course, the infamous portrait of the aviator sunglasses and the guy wearing the gray hooded sweatshirt. And lo and behold, there in the cabin were aviator sunglasses and gray hooded sweatshirt hanging up on a hook over in the corner to the left as you were facing from the outside. Mm-hmm. We found a live bomb on the second day of the search, wrapped and ready to mail. Ironically, it had a return address of the Seattle FBI office. And so he was getting ready to taunt us again. We saw across the cabin. Remember, the cabin 9x12 in size, and then it had a loft. So across from where we were looking through the only door of the cabin, were all kinds of containers, cartons, and bottles. Some were labeled. They were labeled with explosive or ingredients that you could use to make explosives. And in fact, the Unabomber's early bombs had some of these combinations, like potassium chlorate and sodium chlorate and things like that. We found a oatmeal container, a Quaker Oats oatmeal container with pre-made switches that he had already made ahead of time. So he could literally reach onto the shelf and pull off a switch that he might use in a bomb he wants to construct. We found thousands of pages of typed or handwritten notes. And we found a autobiography of him. He had literally laid out his entire life in all of these notes. And we also found admissions and or confessions to all 16 Unabomber devices. Now, what in fact we did find with about 500 pages of those admissions is that he had taught himself Spanish. And he wrote those admissions and confessions in Spanish. So now we had to get on the phone and start assembling every FBI Spanish speaker we had so that we could get those translated and stop any bombs that might now still be in the maelstrom. So we had all these things still going on because of this guy's nature and personality.
One question I wanted to ask you, having read the book, was one of the queries, one of the oddities was the FBI agents analyzing the case before you knew who it was, believed that the forensic experts, they said the Unabomber is melting scrap aluminum for his more recent bombs. He would need an electric-powered kiln to do that. And Ted Kaczynski only had like a wood-burning stove in there. He had no electricity. And so did we ever solve the mystery of how he melted scrap aluminum with just a wood-burning stove, which the forensic expert said he could not do?
Well, they may have said he could not do it, but we've all learned about experts, and the experts were simply wrong. And he had the potbelly stove, and he had a big fire pit dug in front of the cabin, and he melted his own aluminum the hard way. And that's how he was meticulously making these bombs.
And I know we knew this from the manifesto, but we haven't really gotten into it in this interview. But from the manifesto and the materials you found in his cabin and the interviews with his brother David and so on, because Ted was not talking. He clammed right up. What do we know about about the reason for his terror campaign over 20 years?
Yes, he actually goes into that. And he says people are going to give a number of motives to what I'm doing. But I'm doing this because I'm getting personal revenge. I'm doing this because I'm angry. There was really no rationality to all of these things that look so organized, like he might have had an anti-technology beef. Of course, he kind of did. But it was all, when you get down to it, when you think of airlines, he was mad because the planes flying over the wilderness area where he lived made too much noise. So then he'd write, I'm embarking on a plan to get even. And this is kind of how he was thinking. And as Kathy had said early on, this is about anger. It's about what a person like this, a serial killer, a serial criminal, has welled up inside them. They are angry. And certainly Theodore Kaczynski was angry. And so he wrote about his anger. He wrote about personal revenge as a motive. And he gave other motives, of course, but this is what it all came down to for him: anger and revenge at what he thought were slights against him.